glass shattered against the projection screen. Not literally. But the silence in the boardroom felt just as violent when Blaine Rourke slammed his palm against the mahogany table. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. 40 feet of LED display flickered behind him, stock prices bleeding red in real time. 9 figures. Gone. Just like that. "Someone explain," Rourke said, his voice low and sharp, "why I'm looking at a $100 million paperweight." No one moved. The engineers from Boston sat frozen, laptops open, fingers hovering over keyboards that suddenly felt useless. The consultants from California stared at their printed reports like the pages might catch fire. Even the lawyers looked uncomfortable, and lawyers never looked uncomfortable in rooms like this. The prototype sat in the center of the table. A power regulation unit the size of a briefcase, all exposed circuitry and fiber optic cables, built for a federal defense contract that was supposed to change everything. Supposed to. 3 failures in 2 weeks. The third one happened 20 minutes ago. Right here, in front of everyone who mattered. Rourke leaned back in his chair. 52 years old, hair graying at the temples, suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. People who worked at Ravenport Dynamics knew what happened when Blaine Rourke stayed calm. That's when the cuts came. "Dr. Pemberton," Rourke said, eyes locking onto the lead engineer. "You had 3 weeks. What am I missing?" Pemberton cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, the thermal coefficient readings are—" "I didn't ask for readings," Rourke interrupted. "I asked what I'm missing." Pemberton's face flushed. He glanced at his team. No help there. Everyone suddenly found their water bottles fascinating. A woman in a Navy housekeeping uniform stood near the back corner of the room, yellow rubber gloves tucked into her belt, arms crossed tight against her ribs. Iria Cruz, 41 years old, night shift supervisor, 10 years at Ravenport. Invisible to everyone except payroll. Beside her stood a girl, 12 years old, brown skin, dark braid falling over one shoulder, sleeves of her white button-up shirt rolled to her elbows. She wasn't supposed to be there. School science fair ended early. Nowhere else to wait. Maribel thought the boardroom would be empty by now. It wasn't. The girl's eyes weren't on Rourke. They were on the screen, on the diagnostic cascading across the display in green and yellow lines. Her head tilted slightly, the way a mechanic listens to an engine that's knocking wrong. Rourke turned a page in the report in front of him. Didn't read it. Just turned it. The sound of paper against paper felt louder than it should have. "Let me make this simple," Rourke said. "This unit powers autonomous grid systems for military installations. If it fails, people die. If it fails here, in this room, in front of me, then we don't just lose the contract. We lose credibility. And credibility is the only thing keeping our stock from turning into confetti." One of the consultants, a man with the expensive watch and an even more expensive degree, leaned forward. "Mr. Rourke, if we adjust the voltage regulator and recalibrate the damping sequence—" "You said that last week," Rourke said. The consultant stopped talking. The girl's lips moved. Not words. Numbers. She was counting something in her head. Her fingers twitched slightly, like she was running calculations on an invisible keyboard. Maribel noticed. She reached down, touched her daughter's shoulder. A warning. Stay quiet. Stay small. Don't draw attention. But Rourke had already seen her. His gaze shifted. Locked onto the back corner. The woman in the uniform? The child who didn't belong? The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "Why?" Rourke said slowly. "Is that here?" Every head turned. 40 people, all staring at the same spot. Maribel's breath caught. Her hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. "Sir, I'm so sorry." There was a scheduling issue. Her school event ended early, and I didn't have anyone to— "This is a boardroom," Rourke said, "not a daycare." The girl didn't flinch, didn't look away, just kept staring at the screen. Security shifted near the door, waiting for instructions. Maribel's voice cracked. "We'll leave. Right now. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Mom," the girl whispered. Maribel froze. "Mom, the feedback loop is wrong." The words came out soft, barely audible. But in the silence of that room, they might as well have been shouted through a megaphone. Rourke's eyes narrowed. He stood up, slowly. 6'2". Designer shoes clicking against polished tile as he walked toward the back of the room. Every step deliberate, every step measured. He stopped 3 feet away from the girl, looked down at her, and smiled. Not a kind smile. Have you ever been in a room where everyone knew you didn't belong? Iria Cruz had cleaned boardrooms like this for 9 years. She knew the smell. Leather chairs, fresh coffee that cost more per cup than she made in an hour. The faint chemical tang of glass cleaner on walls that never showed fingerprints because people like her made sure they didn't. She knew the rules, too. Come in after hours. Finish before sunrise. Don't touch the documents. Don't ask questions. Don't exist unless someone needs you. Her badge opened 3 doors. Lobby, maintenance closet, break room. That was it. The executive innovation floor? Not her world. She only saw it when someone spilled something expensive, or when the trash bins overflowed after late-night strategy sessions. But today, she was here, standing in the corner, trying not to breathe too loud. Her daughter stood beside her, Iria, named after Maribel's grandmother, a woman who crossed borders with nothing and built something anyway. Maribel hoped the name would carry the same weight, the same strength. It did, just not the way she expected. Iria didn't talk much, never had, not shy, just quiet. The kind of quiet that noticed things, that listened while other people performed. Her teachers called her focused. Her classmates called her weird. Maribel called her careful. Her father called her an engineer before she knew the word. Sergeant Darnell Cruz, U.S. Army, 15 years, mechanic, systems specialist, taught Iria how to take apart radios when she was 6, how to read circuit diagrams when she was 8, how to listen to a machine before touching it when she was 10. He died 2 months after that lesson. Heart attack. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. Maribel worked 2 jobs after that. Ravenport at night, a diner during the day. Iria spent afternoons in libraries, public ones, free ones. She'd sit in the back corner with books on electrical engineering, computer science, physics, stuff most adults didn't understand. She didn't just read them, she tested them. Broken radios from thrift stores, discarded laptops from e-waste bins. She fixed them, not because anyone asked, because her father taught her that systems made sense when people didn't. Now she stood in a boardroom full of people who got paid 6 figures to understand systems. And she saw what they missed. The engineers were still arguing, voices rising, fingers jabbing at printouts. Dr. Pemberton kept saying, thermal coefficient, like the words would fix the problem if he just said them loud enough. The consultants nodded along, adding jargon that sounded smart, but meant nothing. Iria's eyes stayed on the screen. The diagnostic showed a cascading failure. Voltage spiked. Regulator compensated. Spiked again. compensated harder, spiked a third time, shut down. But it wasn't random. It was recursive. The system wasn't overheating. It was overcompensating, correcting a problem that didn't exist, creating a new problem in the process, then correcting that one too. Over and over, faster each time, until the whole thing collapsed under its own logic. Her father's voice echoed in her head. If a machine keeps breaking the same way, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what someone told it to do. She tugged her mother's sleeve. Maribel looked down, shook her head slightly. Not now. Please, not now. But Iria's lips moved anyway. Barely a whisper. The feedback loop is wrong. Maribel's heart dropped into her stomach. No. No, no, no. Don't say anything. Don't draw attention. Just stay quiet. Stay invisible. That's how you survive rooms like this. But Blaine Rourke heard. He always heard the things people tried to hide. He stopped mid-sentence, turned his head, stared at the back corner like he'd just noticed a stain on expensive furniture. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful. The kind that feels like a held breath before something breaks. Rourke walked toward them. Slow. Controlled. His shoes clicked against the tile like a countdown. Maribel stepped forward. Put herself between her daughter and the man who could erase her job with a single phone call. Sir, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean... Rourke raised one hand. Palm out. Stop. Maribel stopped. He looked past her. Down. At Iria. The girl didn't move. Didn't shrink. Just looked back. Rourke's smile widened. And that's when Maribel knew. He wasn't angry. He was entertained. What happens when the most powerful person in the room decides you're the punchline? Dr. Pemberton tried again. Same explanation. Different words. Same result. If we isolate the voltage input and recalibrate the damping threshold. Rourke cut him off with a glance. Pemberton sat down. The consultant from California stood up, cleared his throat, opened a laptop, started a presentation no one asked for. Our modeling suggests that the issue stems from a misalignment in the phase lock loop, which could be resolved by implementing a secondary feedback buffer that... Rourke closed the laptop. The consultant sat down. 3 engineers, 2 consultants, 1 systems analyst. All of them hired because they had degrees from schools that cost more than houses. All of them staring at the same problem. All of them saying the same useless things. The prototype sat in the middle of the table like a corpse at a funeral no one wanted to attend. Behind Rourke, the LED display cycled through stock data. Ravenport Dynamics, down 4%, then 5, then 6. Every failed test bled value in real time. Investors didn't care about excuses. They cared about results. Rourke cared about control. He leaned back in his chair, tapped one finger against the armrest, a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind that made people nervous because it meant he was thinking. And when Blaine Rourke thought, someone usually suffered for it. Let me summarize, he said. 3 weeks, 3 failures, 40 people in this building working on one problem. And the best answer I've heard so far is, we'll try again. No one responded. Rourke's finger stopped tapping. Do you know what happens if we lose this contract? Still nothing. We don't just lose revenue, Rourke continued. We lose reputation. We lose future bids. We lose the only thing that separates us from every other defense contractor begging for scraps. And I don't beg. One of the engineers opened his mouth. Rourke's eyes flicked toward him. The engineer closed his mouth. The stock ticker scrolled past again. Down 7% now. Analysts would be calling within the hour. Board members would start asking questions. Questions Rourke didn't have answers for. He hated not having answers. Maribel stood frozen near the wall, her hands clasped in front of her, her breathing shallow. She'd worked at Ravenport long enough to recognize the tone in Rourke's voice. Cold, controlled, dangerous. Iria stood beside her, still watching the screen. Her lips moved again, counting, calculating, tracing invisible circuits in the air with her eyes. Maribel reached down, squeezed her daughter's hand. A silent plea. Please, just stay quiet. Just this once. But Iria wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking at the failure pattern on the screen, at the way the voltage spiked in intervals, at the way the system kept trying to fix itself and made everything worse. Her father's voice again, clear as glass. Systems don't lie, baby girl. People do. But systems, they tell you exactly what's wrong. You just have to listen. She had been listening for the past hour. While the engineers argued about thermal coefficients and phase lock loops, Iria watched the diagnostic repeat the same cascade. Spike, compensate, spike, compensate harder, collapse. It wasn't a hardware problem, it was a logic problem. The regulator was damping the signal twice, once in the primary circuit, again in the secondary buffer. The system thought it was stabilizing, but it was actually choking itself. Her father would have seen it in 5 minutes. These people had been staring at it for 3 weeks. Iria tugged her mother's sleeve. Maribel's eyes went wide. No, please no. Iria leaned close, whispered, Mom, the feedback loop is wrong. This time she didn't whisper quiet enough. Rourke's head turned, so did everyone else's. 40 pairs of eyes, all locked on a 12-year-old girl in a wrinkled school uniform standing next to a woman in a housekeeping outfit. Rourke stood, walked toward them. His smile wasn't a smile anymore. It was something else, something colder. He stopped 2 feet away, looked down at Iria. What did you just say? What would you do if the only person who believed you was the one person who wanted you to fail? The room held its breath. Iria looked up at Blaine Rourke, 6'2" of tailored arrogance, a man who built empires by crushing people smaller than him, a man who didn't ask questions unless he already knew the answer. But right now, he didn't. And that made him curious. I said, Iria repeated, voice steady, the feedback loop is wrong. Someone laughed. One of the engineers from Boston, a man with a MIT diploma framed in his office and a mortgage that depended on people like Rourke staying happy. He laughed like Iria had just said the earth was flat. Others joined in. Nervous laughter. The kind that happens when people don't know what else to do. Rourke didn't laugh. He tilted his head slightly, studied Iria the way someone studies a bug under glass. Interesting, harmless, easy to crush. The feedback loop, Rourke repeated slowly, is wrong. Iria nodded. And you know this because the system's damping the signal twice, Iria said. Once in the primary regulator, again in the secondary buffer. It thinks it's stabilizing, but it's overcompensating. That's why it keeps spiking. It's not a hardware failure, it's a logic error. The laughter stopped. Dr. Pemberton blinked, looked at his laptop, looked at the screen, looked back at Iria. Rourke's smile returned, not amused, predatory. How old are you? 12. 12, Rourke repeated. He glanced at Maribel. And your mother is? Night shift supervisor, Maribel said quickly, voice shaking. Housekeeping. Sir, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean to interrupt. Rourke raised a hand. Maribel stopped talking. He looked back at Iria. Do you know what this system is worth? No, sir. 9 figures. Do you know what 9 figures means? $100 million or more. Rourke's eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed despite himself. Smart kid, he said. Then his smile sharpened. But smart doesn't mean correct. He turned back to the table, addressed the room. Dr. Pemberton, this child just told you what's wrong with your prototype. Thoughts? Pemberton's face flushed red. Sir, with all due respect, the damping sequence was designed by… I didn't ask who designed it, Rourke said. I asked if she's right. Pemberton opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his team. No one helped him. Rourke turned back to Iria. You seem confident, he said. I am. Why? Because my father taught me how systems fail. Something flickered across Rourke's face. Too fast to read. Gone before anyone noticed. Your father, Rourke said slowly. What did he do? He was a mechanic, Iria said. U.S. Army. He fixed things. Rourke nodded, processing, filing that information away somewhere dangerous. Then he smiled again. And this time, the smile reached his eyes. Tell you what, Rourke said. I like confidence. I like people who think they know better than everyone else in the room. So let's make this interesting. Maribel's stomach dropped. Rourke gestured toward the prototype in the center of the table. Fix it, he said. The room erupted. Sir, you can't be serious. She's a child. This is a federal contract. Rourke silenced them with a look. He kept his eyes on Iria. Fix it, he repeated. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. Maribel stepped forward. Mr. Rourke, please, she's just… If she's right, Rourke said, voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. I'll write her a check for $100 million. The room went silent. Dead silent. Maribel's knees almost buckled. $100 million. Rourke let the number hang in the air. Let everyone feel the weight of it. Then he leaned in close enough that only Iria and Maribel could hear the next part. And if she's wrong, he said quietly, you're both escorted out of this building and blacklisted from every company I do business with. Forever. Maribel couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Rourke straightened, smiled at the room like he'd just made a joke. So, he said, what do you say? Would you risk everything for the chance to prove the powerful wrong? Silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Maribel grabbed Iria's arm, her grip hard enough to bruise, her voice barely a whisper. We're leaving. Right now. Iria didn't move. Mom? No. Maribel's voice cracked. No. We're not doing this. Around them, the room buzzed. Low voices, whispers. Phones being pulled out. Someone was recording this. Someone always recorded things like this. Dr. Pemberton looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The consultants exchanged glances. The lawyers started typing emails to cover themselves when this inevitably went wrong. Security stood near the door. 2 men, both watching Maribel and Iria like they were already trespassing. Rourke leaned against the table, arms crossed, expression calm. He wasn't worried. Why would he be? He'd just made a bet he couldn't lose. If the girl failed, he got entertainment and an example. Arrogance punished, hierarchy restored, a story people would tell for years. Remember that time some janitor's kid thought she could fix a 9-figure prototype? If she succeeded, which was impossible, he'd write a check that would bury him in good press. Genius billionaire discovers hidden talent, invests in the next generation. Forbes would eat it up. Either way, he won. Maribel pulled Iria toward the door. Iria planted her feet. Mom, I can do this. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Maribel's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her daughter. 12 years old. barely 5 feet tall, wearing a school uniform with a stain on the collar from lunch, standing in a boardroom full of people who would destroy her if she failed. "Baby, please," Maribel whispered. "Please. We can't risk this. We can't." Iria looked up at her mother, then at Rourke, then at the prototype in the center of the table. Her father's voice again, clear as daylight. "You only get one chance to show people who you really are. Don't waste it being quiet." Iria took a breath. Let it out. Pulled her arm free from her mother's grip and stepped forward. The room erupted again. "This is insane." "She's 12. Someone stop this." Rourke raised his hand. Everyone stopped talking. He looked at Iria, still smiling. "You're sure?" Iria nodded. "Say it out loud," Rourke said, "so everyone hears." Iria's voice didn't shake. "I'm sure." Rourke gestured toward the prototype. "Then let's see what you've got." Iria walked toward the table. Every step felt like moving through water. The room pressed in around her, 40 people watching, judging, waiting for her to fail so they could feel better about their own failures. She stopped in front of the prototype. Exposed circuitry, fiber optic cables, military-grade components most civilians never saw. Complex, expensive, dangerous. She didn't touch it yet. First, she looked at the diagnostic on the screen, traced the failure pattern with her eyes, followed the cascade from start to collapse. Then she looked back at the prototype. Her fingers hovered over the housing. Dr. Pemberton leaned forward. "You can't just let her work," Rourke said. Pemberton shut up. Iria glanced at the tools spread across the table. Screwdrivers, wire strippers, multimeter, diagnostic tablet. She picked up a screwdriver, not the electric one, the manual one, small, precise, the kind her father used. She looked at Rourke. "I need everyone to stop talking," she said. Rourke almost laughed. Almost. "You heard her," he said to the room. "Quiet." The room went silent. Iria turned back to the prototype, unscrewed the access panel, and got to work. What would you do if the entire world was watching you prove them wrong? Iria's hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Steady, deliberate, no hesitation. She removed the secondary buffer housing, set it aside. The fiber optic cables glowed faint blue in the overhead lights. Beautiful, delicate, expensive enough to buy a house. She didn't care about the cost. She cared about the logic. Her father's lessons played in her head like a recording. Isolate the problem. Don't assume anything. Test one variable at a time. Listen to what the system tells you. The room watched in silence. Dr. Pemberton chewed his thumbnail. The consultants leaned forward in their chairs. Security stayed by the door, hands crossed, waiting for orders that hadn't come yet. Maribel stood frozen near the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Rourke watched from his position against the table, arms still crossed, face unreadable. But his eyes tracked every movement Iria made, every wire she touched, every component she examined. Iria pulled out the compensation capacitor, held it up to the light, examined the connections. Nothing wrong with the hardware. The problem wasn't what was broken. It was what was working too well. She set the capacitor aside, picked up the diagnostic tablet, scrolled through the control logic, line by line, function by function, looking for the double compensation her father's voice kept pointing toward. There. 2 damping sequences, running parallel, both trying to stabilize the same signal, both making it worse. She isolated the secondary sequence, commented it out, saved the change. Then she reached for the power switch. Dr. Pemberton stood up. "Wait, you can't just—" Rourke held up one finger. Pemberton sat back down. Iria didn't look at anyone. She recalibrated the primary regulator, adjusted the threshold values, double-checked the voltage input parameters. Her hands didn't shake. Not once. She reconnected the fiber optic cables, secured the housing, tightened the screws. 10 minutes had passed. Maybe 12. It felt like hours. She picked up the multimeter, tested the output voltage. Stable. She tested the current flow. Clean. No spikes, no fluctuations. She looked at the diagnostic screen one more time. Ran a simulation. The cascade that had been failing for 3 weeks now ran smooth. Green lines, no warnings, no errors. Iria took a breath, put her hand on the power switch, and flipped it on. The prototype hummed to life. Low, steady, perfect. The LED display behind Rourke lit up green. Diagnostics streamed across the screen. Voltage stable, current regulated, temperature nominal, all systems operational. No alarms, no warnings, no failure. The room didn't breathe. Iria stepped back from the table, looked at Rourke, and waited. Have you ever done something impossible and watched people realize they were wrong about you? The green light held. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Dr. Pemberton lunged for his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, running diagnostics, checking parameters, looking for the error that had to be there because this couldn't be real. But it was real. The system held. Voltage steady at exactly where it needed to be. Current flowing clean through every circuit. Temperature climbing to operational levels and stopping. Not spiking, not cascading, not failing. Working. One of the consultants stood up, walked to the prototype, stared at it like it might explode if he looked away. It didn't explode, it just kept working. Run it again, someone said. Pemberton ran the diagnostic sequence again, then a third time. Green, green, green. The room shifted, not all at once, slowly, like a tide changing direction. The engineers stopped looking at their laptops and started looking at Iria. The consultants stopped whispering and started calculating. The lawyers stopped typing and started watching Rourke. Because Rourke hadn't moved. He stood against the table, same position, same crossed arms, but something in his face had changed. The smile was gone, replaced by something harder to read, something that looked almost like recognition, or fear. Maribel's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. Her daughter, her 12-year-old daughter, had just fixed something 40 experts couldn't, in front of the most dangerous man in the building. Iria stood beside the prototype, hands at her sides, waiting. Rourke pushed off the table, walked toward her. Slow steps, deliberate. His shoes clicking against the tile in that same rhythm that made people nervous. He stopped 2 feet away, looked down at her, looked at the green diagnostics on the screen, looked back at her. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "My father taught me," Iria said. "What was his name?" Iria hesitated, just for a second. Something in Rourke's voice had changed. Something cold. Something sharp. "Darnell Cruz," she said. The color drained from Rourke's face, not slowly, all at once. Like someone had opened a valve and let everything out. His jaw tightened. His eyes went distant, focused on something only he could see. Something from years ago. Something he thought he'd buried. Dr. Pemberton noticed. "Sir, are you—" Rourke held up a hand. Pemberton stopped talking. The room watched, confused, concerned. No one understood what was happening, except Rourke, and maybe Iria. Rourke took a step back, then another. His hands dropped to his sides. His breathing changed, faster, shallower. He looked at Iria one more time. Then he turned, walked toward the door. "Sir?" one of the lawyers called. "What about the—" "Meeting's over," Rourke said without stopping, without looking back. He pushed through the glass doors and disappeared down the hallway, leaving 40 people staring at each other in stunned silence. And a 12-year-old girl standing next to a $100 million prototype that finally worked. What do you do when winning feels more dangerous than losing? Rourke made it to his private office before his hands started shaking. Mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. He'd built this, all of it, through intelligence, ruthlessness, and decisions that left bodies in his wake. Decisions like Darnell Cruz. Rourke collapsed into his chair, pressed his palms against his eyes, tried to stop the memory from flooding back. But it came anyway. 15 years ago. Different company. Smaller office. Rourke wasn't a billionaire yet, just a vice president with ambition and a patent problem. Darnell Cruz had been a junior engineer. Military background, quiet, smart, too smart. He'd designed a power regulation system that solved a problem everyone else said was impossible. Rourke saw the value immediately. He also saw the threat. If Cruz got credit, Cruz got leverage. Leverage meant negotiation. Negotiation meant sharing profits. Sharing meant weakness. So Rourke took the design, filed it under his own name, buried Cruz's contributions in paperwork. When Cruz complained, Rourke had him reassigned. When Cruz pushed harder, Rourke had him fired. When Cruz threatened legal action, Rourke buried him in NDAs and legal fees until the man had nothing left. Cruz died 3 years later. Heart attack, stress-related. Rourke heard about it through industry gossip, felt nothing, just another casualty of progress. Except Cruz had been right. The power regulation system had a flaw. A feedback loop that would cause cascading failures if pushed too hard. Cruz had warned him, written memos, sent emails, begged someone to listen. Rourke ignored every single one, because acknowledging the flaw meant acknowledging Cruz, and acknowledging Cruz meant admitting theft. So Rourke buried the warnings along with everything else. Until today, when a 12-year-old girl walked into his boardroom and fixed the same problem her father had identified 15 years ago, using the same logic, the same methodology, the same understanding of systems that made Darnell Cruz dangerous enough to destroy. Rourke's phone buzzed, emails flooding in, board members, investors, analysts, all wanting answers about the meeting that just ended without explanation. He ignored them, opened his desk drawer, pulled out a file he hadn't touched in years. Yellowed papers, old contracts, employment records, Darnell Cruz, personnel file, termination date, cause, performance issues, a lie, one of many. Rourke closed the file, shoved it back in the drawer, locked it. But locks didn't stop truth. They just delayed it. He looked out the window at the city below. Thousands of people. Millions of transactions. All built on systems that only worked when people followed rules. Rourke had spent his entire career breaking rules. Now the rules were breaking him back. Can you run from your past when it shows up in a 12-year-old's eyes? 3 weeks later, federal auditors arrived at Ravenport Dynamics. No warning. No appointment. Just 12 people in dark suits carrying briefcases and subpoenas. They set up in Conference Room B, requested files, emails, personnel records, contract histories. Everything related to the power regulation prototype and the military contract. Dr. Pemberton cooperated immediately. So did the consultants. So did everyone who realized cooperation meant survival. The emails came first. Threads from 15 years ago. Darnell Cruz warning about feedback damping. Warning about recursive failures. Warning about exactly what happened 3 weeks ago in that boardroom. Warnings Rourke had deleted. Except he hadn't deleted them. He'd archived them. And archives always surfaced during audits. Then came the patent filings. Original designs submitted under Rourke's name, with timestamps that didn't match the dates he claimed, with engineering notes written in someone else's handwriting. Someone named Darnell Cruz. Then came the termination records. Performance issues. That's what the file said. But the performance reviews told a different story. Excellent marks, consistent praise, promoted twice in 3 years. Until he wasn't. Until he complained about intellectual property theft. Until Blaine Rourke decided he was a problem. The federal contract got suspended pending investigation. Ravenport's stock dropped 12% in 1 day, 16% by the end of the week. Board members started calling emergency meetings. Lawyers started drafting settlements. PR teams started preparing statements that used words like review and procedural and no wrongdoing. But the evidence didn't care about PR. It just existed. Maribel Cruz received a letter 4 weeks after the boardroom incident. Plain white envelope. No return address. Expensive paper. Inside was a single page. Printed. Official. A scholarship fund. Full tuition. Private mentorship. Living expenses. All the way through graduate school if Iria wanted it. The fund had been established 8 years ago. By Darnell Cruz, before he died. He'd set it up as a trust, activated only if certain conditions were met. Conditions involving his daughter demonstrating engineering aptitude in a specific context. He'd known. Somehow, impossibly, he'd known. That one day his daughter would need proof, would need protection, would need something he couldn't give her while he was alive. So he gave it to her, from beyond the grave. Maribel sat at her kitchen table, read the letter 3 times, cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she showed it to Iria. Iria read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in the same box where she kept her father's tools. How do you thank someone who saved you years before you knew you needed saving? Iria Cruz graduated MIT at 19. Doctorate at 23, patents filed, papers published, job offers from companies that used to ignore people like her. She turned them all down, started her own consulting firm instead. Small, selective, focused on one thing, fixing systems that powerful people broke. Her reputation spread fast. The girl who humiliated a billionaire. The daughter who finished what her father started. The engineer who proved that credentials don't measure intelligence. Just competence does. Maribel retired from Ravenport at 50. Bought a house. Small. Paid off. With a workshop in the garage where Iria still kept her father's tools. Blaine Rourke resigned from Ravenport Dynamics 18 months after the boardroom incident. Not fired. Not charged, just gone. The settlement was sealed. The details buried under NDAs thick enough to choke on. But the industry remembered. They always remember. 6 years after that day in the boardroom, Iria sat in a Congressional hearing room. Mahogany table, nameplates, cameras, politicians asking questions about defense contracting fraud and intellectual property theft. She answered every question, calmly, precisely. With the same focus she'd shown at 12 years old, fixing a prototype everyone else said was impossible. The committee listened, because this time she wasn't a child in a boardroom full of people who wanted her to fail. She was an expert witness with receipts. When the hearing ended, a journalist asked her what she wanted people to remember about her father. Iria thought about it, about the tools, about the lessons, about the trust fund that proved love doesn't end when life does. He taught me that systems tell the truth, she said, even when people don't. She walked out of the hearing room into a future her father had built for her one lesson at a time. And somewhere, in the quiet space where memory and legacy meet, Darnell Cruz smiled. What will you build for the people who come after you?